All right, welcome back. We previously talked about the Second Great Awakening, how it's going to start leading to different reform movements throughout the United States. And so today we're going to continue talking about different social reforms and reform movements that will be occurring in the United States starting in the 1800s that continue on through the 1850s. So there's going to be a couple really important people. Dorothea Dix will lead quite a few reforms that we're going to talk about at first. And so it's going to be important to know who she is. So Dorothea Dix um, was a former school teacher before she became a social reformer. But because of the emphasis that the Second Great Awakening placed on improving society, it'll inspire many Americans. And yes, Dorothea Dix will be one of these Americans that will be inspired. And so these Americans launched a number of reform movements with far reaching effects on prisons, care of the disabled, education, and attitudes toward slavery. So today we're going to talk about a lot of the prisons and care for disabled as well as education. So women will often play a leading role in these reform movements that we're talking about. And so, like I said, in 1841, Dorothea Dix will visit a jail for women near Boston, Massachusetts. And remember, like I said, Dorothea Dix is a former school teacher, so she's relatively well educated. She would be outraged to discover that some of the prisoners were not criminals, but were actually just mentally ill. So they really never created any crime. They were just mentally ill at the time, and due to a lack of basically knowledge and understanding, instead of dealing with these people and treating them, they just put them in jail and left them there. So she'll demand to know why women were locked in small, dark, unheated cells, when in her opinion they should be treated a little better, especially those that actually did not commit any crimes. And so she would go on to visit other jails, poorhouses, and hospitals throughout Massachusetts shortly after. And so she's going to spend 18 months visiting all these places. And at the end of this 18 months, um, she will be inspired to write reports to the state legislature of Massachusetts. And basically, she will almost single handedly convince them that they need to fund a new mental hospital for the state. This will be necessary to basically care for these mentally ill patients. Instead of treating them as prisoners, they will be treated as patients and actually treated well and taken care of and hopefully have their needs met. And Dorothea Dix will also inspect jails as far away as Louisiana and Illinois. So she's not going to work just in Massachusetts, she's going to work in multiple other states. And her reports will persuade most legislatures to treat mentally ill patients as patients, actually, and not as criminals, because it's not really their fault that they have this mental illness. And so, as far as the impact of prison reform will go, Dix will join a growing movement to improve conditions in prisons. Men and women, and even children, were often crammed together in cold, damp rooms, and when their food supplies were low, prisoners would go hungry unless they had enough money to buy meals from jailers. So basically, in other words, men, women, children, didn't matter who you were, you're all cramped into these dark, dingy rooms, and you're all locked up together. And also, food supplies, if they started running out, the guards ate and the prisoners went hungry. The guards didn't care. And the only way in the shortages, if you were able to get food, would be if you had enough money to pay for them from the jailers. Also, 5 out of 6 people in the northern jails were debtors, and debtors are people who could not pay money that they owed to people. So they would put them in jail as their punishment. And while behind bars, debtors had no way to earn money to pay back their debts, which resulted in many debtors actually remaining in prison for years. So because you're in prison because you owe money, you are unable to work because you're in prison. Therefore, since you're unable to work, you'll never really be able to pay off this debt. So, therefore, you remain in prison until your debt is paid off. So, if you think about it a little bit, it's kind of a backwards system there. And so, um, Dix and others are going to call for changes in the prison system as a result of this kind of backwards system they have going. And so, as a result, some states will build prisons with only one or two inmates to a cell instead of seven or eight. Cruel punishments were banned, and people who were convicted of minor crimes received shorter sentences. And so they'd be in there for like a month or two instead of several years, like people that are in there for more serious crimes. And also, slowly, states will stop treating debtors as criminals. So instead of criminalizing these people for owing money, state, states are sorry, states are now going to basically not lock you up for owing money, but they will monitor you to make sure that you are paying the necessary money you owe to specific people. So this will be another thing that Dorothea Dix will be involved in. So the impact of the temperance movement has to deal with alcohol. So alcohol abuse is widespread in the early 1800s, whether it was at political rallies, weddings, and funerals. Men, women, and sometimes even children will drink heavily. Um, and so the temperance movement, well, it does start in the early 1800s. It will continue on throughout the 1850s, kind of died down for a bit, but at the end of the 1800s, right around 1890, it will start picking up again. And actually, believe it or not, during 1917, the temperance movement will finally succeed in their overall goal and actually have alcohol banned throughout the entire United States. So the thing is, men could buy whiskey from anywhere from candy stores to barber shops to the general store. It didn't matter where. Men could pretty much get whiskey wherever they wanted. And the temperance movement was a campaign against alcohol abuse and will take shape in the late 1820s. Women will often take a leading role in the battle during the temperance movement. And so women faced a majority of this abuse from alcohol and what it did to their husbands, and how it destroyed their families. So they're going to be kind of on the front lines here trying to get this ban on alcohol passed throughout the United States. And some temperance groups will also urge people to drink less. So not just a complete ban, they're just going to try to get people to drink less alcohol, whereas other groups will seek to end drinking altogether, and they want to ban alcohol all throughout the United States. And so um, the temperance movement, like I said, they will have some success in the 1850s. Um, in Maine in the 1850s, they will pass a law that basically bans alcohol throughout the entire state. You can't buy alcohol in Maine. Several other states will follow that as well. However, in the end, they're going to end up repealing those laws. And like I said, it won't be until around 1890 that you'll see the temperance movement really kick in again. And we'll talk about that when you guys get to high school in 10th grade. But yeah, this temperance movement is going to die down again after the 1850s when the states start repealing those bans on alcohol. And the temperance movement, like I said, picks up again in the 1890s because it's viewed as immoral, dangerous to families, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not until, like I said, 1917, where actually we passed the 18th Amendment, which bans the sale of alcohol and and making of alcohol all throughout the United States. And that'll eventually get repealed with the 21st Amendment, but it will become a very big deal later on in time. So it's very important to remember the temperance movement. And so, reformers on education, well, education will be very heavily reformed during this period of time as well. So, in colonial times, children's education would start in the home and often end in the home with very little formal schooling. Some children would also receive an education through their church or would be privately taught. So they'd have private tutors or they'd learn at basically like a church school. And so that's about all the education they had during colonial times. Several colonies and states, though, will partly fund public grammar schools, which are basically going to be good enough to teach children how to read and write. And that's about all they're really going to learn in these grammar schools. The books used in these schools that help students gain reading skills, but they also had social and civic purposes. So these grammar books they'd be learning out of not only taught them valuable English skills like reading and writing, but it also taught them a little bit about history as well as civic duty and government, just because of what the books contained and the material that the students would be learning to read and write with. Until the mid 1800s, though, few American children will actually attend any real school. For the most part, like I said, up until the mid 1800s, it's you learn at home or you go to church and you learn at your church. In 1827, though, Massachusetts will become the first state to require free, community supported public schools for all children. So, Massachusetts is going to lead the way again. Not only did they do this with the social reforms for prisons and mentally ill, but they're also going to lead the way with education. And so, it's now required for children in Massachusetts starting in 1827 to go to public school for a certain amount of time. And teachers, though, at this time were very poorly trained, usually, and very ill paid. And students of all ages would be crowded together in a single room. And this would make it very difficult for the teachers. Well, most teachers would have specialties or be good with certain age groups in certain areas. Um, because they had to teach to all levels, it made it very difficult for them to do this. And so, as more men win the right to vote, reformers will act to improve education even more. The reformers will argue that a republic, which is the United States, requires educated citizens, and they also believe that children should not spend their whole day working in a factory because they thought that kids belonged in school. So, as a result of this, you are going to start seeing a ban on child labor, and basically kids would not be allowed to work under the age of 15, or if they were, then they would be limited to a certain number of hours per day. And this would hold true for quite a while. And you'll see even more in the early 1900s when we get to the progressive movement with how much more strict this will actually become. Um, and it will limit the number of hours students are allowed to work even more and require them to go to school longer. And there's going to be several driving factors that will start changing things in public education. Horace Mann will be a big one. And he is in Massachusetts once again. And so he would be inspired by the Second Great Awakening, like a lot of other people. And so he would basically revamp the entire Massachusetts school system and start preparing kids to get ready to go to college and things like this. He's also going to open three different colleges just to train teachers. So Horace Mann will be pretty much responsible for a very similar basically way of teaching that we have today with teachers going or well people going to college to become teachers, so you're specially trained now to become a teacher. And so this would be implemented all the way back in 1837 by Horace Mann. And so that's going to basically take us to the end of today's lesson. Tomorrow we will pick up with women's rights and the women's movement, and we will finish the remainder of lesson 5 tomorrow. So, if you have any questions, please email me. Lesson 6 is going to look a little different. It's going to be super short. As you can see on Thursday, I'm going to put out a study guide in Google Forms, so the link to that will be on my webpage. And also, we will be having a short answer test on Friday. So we will talk more about that tomorrow at the end of tomorrow's notes. So hopefully you had a good spring break. Welcome back for well the remainder of the school year, and it will we will be in touch again later on.